Alicia said, my name is Keaveney. My project is called Teacher Bias and Parental Identity as Causes of Racial and Socioeconomic Inequality in Gifted Education. I did this project in the Research and Humanities program with Dr. Parental. So today what I'm going to be talking about is something that I know all of us are familiar with, gifted education. I know all of you are familiar with it because you go to the school or you're at the school today. NCSSM is sort of the pinnacle of gifted education in North Carolina, specifically for students gifted in the sciences and mathematics. So I think it's important for all of us to think about what gifted education means and inequality in gifted education means for us. So I'm going to sort of start with the success of gifted education. So gifted students identified before the age of 13 are more likely to pursue doctoral degrees, and they're also more likely to have higher quality of life characteristics such as earnings at age 27, college attendance, more likely to own a home after they graduate college, and to have a retirement savings account. So the connection I'm sort of trying to make here is between gifted education participation and quality of life. Students who participate in gifted education are more likely to have a higher quality of life after they're done with their educational career. And it's also important to note that students who are identified early on in gifted education are more likely to be identified again and again and again. So third grade is sort of the turning point for a lot of students where they're first identified as gifted, and then later on when they go to middle school, they're put in gifted education programs, and then high school and into college and so on and so forth. So it's important to think about the ways that early gifted identification leads to later gifted identification and then higher quality of life later on. So the issue that I'm going to be talking about today is if gifted education is correlated with higher quality of life, any inequalities in the gifted identification process will produce inequalities in quality of life later on. So the questions that we need to think about are, first, are there any inequalities in gifted education? Spoiler alert, yes. That's why this talk exists. Go ahead. And then what causes those inequalities? That's sort of the thesis of my project. And then the third question is, what are the implications of what I'm going to talk about? So this is sort of answering that first question. This is a bar chart of the percentage of the population born since 2007, so the student population, and the percentage in gifted education programs. And you can see that there is an extraordinarily disproportionate majority of white students and Asian students in gifted education programs, and extraordinarily disproportionate underrepresentation of Hispanic and Black students, as well as multiracial groups and Native Americans. And a common argument I hear is that because whites take up the majority of the population, they should take up the majority of gifted education programs, and that's fair enough. But you can see that it's a disproportionate majority. Ideally, the green and the gray bars should be level with one another, if that's the perspective we want to take, and that's clearly not the case. And then there's also socioeconomic inequality. So low socioeconomic status is inversely correlated with early literacy and early academic success. So, which both of those are early gifted identifiers. So you're less likely to be identified as gifted if you're of low socioeconomic status. And it's also important to think about how race and socioeconomic status are inseparably intertwined. If you're Black and Hispanic, you're more likely to be low income, and if you're white and Asian, you're more likely to be more affluent. So it's important to think about how issues with one group affect the other group. And you can see that in the chart over there, that there's a disproportionately high number of Black and Hispanic people who are below the poverty line, and disproportionately low amount of whites and Asians. So I've sort of answered that first question. Is there inequality in gifted education? And the answer is clearly yes. So what causes that? The thesis of my project is that the underrepresentation of students of color and low-income students in gifted education is caused by teacher bias towards white and affluent students and insufficient involvement of low-income and uneducated parents in their child's education. So first, that first part of that thesis, which is teacher bias. And to start off, I'm not saying teachers are bad people. Teachers are wonderful people. But all of us sort of have these unconscious biases that we need to become aware of. So teacher bias comes up in teacher referral, which is one of the most common gifted identifiers, where a teacher says, I think that student is gifted, I'm going to recommend them for a gifted education program. And that's not usually the end-all be-all of gifted identification. There's often standardized testing that goes along with that, but this is an important process. And studies have shown that white teachers are more likely to underestimate Black and Hispanic students and overestimate white and Asian students, as well as more affluent students tend to be overestimated and low-income students are underestimated. And you can see that in these statistics here, that non-Black teachers are 12% more likely to predict Black students will drop out, and white teachers 30% less likely to predict that Black students will achieve 4-year degrees. And you can see that over in the chart over there. That's just another example. And when 82% of teachers in the United States are white, that becomes very, very important. Because if so much of the teaching population is biased towards white and affluent students and biased against Black and Hispanic and low-income students, then you're going to have some really big problems. And we can see that that comes up in a study that I'm going to talk about on the next slide. So there was a study done in a large and diverse school district in Florida. Their gifted education identification process was that first, teachers would refer students to gifted education programs, and if you're recommended by your teacher, then you would take an IQ test. And if you did well enough on the IQ test, you'd be admitted to the gifted education program. If you weren't identified by a teacher, you had to pay for the IQ test if you wanted to take it, which is again sort of another socioeconomic advantage. So what this study did was it totally eliminated teacher referral. It took it out of the equation. Everybody in the school district took a free IQ test. And what the study found was that free reduced price lunch students, English language learners, and girls were all systematically under-referred to the gifted education program. And some of the statistics for this are astounding. Black students, when you took away teacher referral, there was an 80% increase in the number of Black students in gifted education programs. There was a 130% increase in Hispanic students in gifted education programs. And then there was a 180% increase in free or reduced price lunch students if you took teacher referral out of the equation. So again, I'm not saying teachers are bad people, but there is bias here that we need to be aware of. And it's something that's really, really difficult to identify and prevent, but it's something that we need to be thinking about. So on to the second part of my thesis, which deals with parental involvement. And when I say parental involvement, I mean positive parental influences. Not parents going to teachers and hounding them about grades, parents doing their child's homework for them, none of that. What I'm talking about is providing books for their child, encouraging them to read, sitting down, helping them with their math homework, attending school functions, parent-teacher conferences. All those are forms of positive parental influences in their child's education. And with increased parental involvement comes increased test scores, likelihood of high school graduation, and the development of learning and communication skills that are very important for a child's education. So it's again important to think about the identity characteristics that are going to lead to more or less parental involvement. And there are two primary parental identity characteristics that I'm concerned with here. One is parental income. Parental income is related to the amount of money that parents can spend on their child's education. The wealthier parents are, the more likely they are to invest in their child's education. It also means that the more likely they are to have an occupation that has flexible working hours for them to attend school functions and that type of thing. And the second is parental education level. The more educated parents are, the more inclined they are to invest in their child's education. The more likely they are to value education and instill that value in their child. So income is related to how much parents can spend, and education level is related to how much parents are inclined to spend. And again, these two are inseparably related, because the more educated you are, the more likely you are to make more money. So you got to think about these in sort of the same context. And this is another graph showing just that. As parental education level increases, their involvement with the school increases. So attending a school or class event, and volunteering or serving on a committee such as PTA, all of these are forms of positive parental influences in a child's education, and that increases with parental education. And again, this is also related to income, because the more educated you are, the more likely you are to make more money. So to conclude, I'm going to go back to my thesis. The underrepresentation of students of color and low-income students in the gifted identification process is caused by teacher biases and parental identity, which is related to the insufficient involvement of low-income and uneducated parents in their child's education. So now to that third question. The importance of this is that this can be considered a source of a stifling and racist American economic system in which the poor stay poor and the rich get richer. The poor and the low-income people are more likely to be Black and Hispanic and Native American or multiracial, and the wealthier are more likely to be white and Asian. And the rich are just getting richer, and the poor are just staying poor. Think about a student who is passed over by gifted education programs in the 3rd grade. And then that perpetuates throughout their high school career. They're left behind by the educational system. And they graduate high school, and they go into the workforce. And then they have children, and because the educational system didn't invest in that child, the parent is not going to invest in the educational system. So then their children are less likely to be identified. Whereas take a student like me, and I would imagine some of you who have had the parents and the teachers and the support structure that pushes us through our education and helps us value education as much as we do. And when we grow up, we're going to have children, and those children are going to value education because we value education. We're going to be those parents that are higher income and are more educated and will invest in our child's education. So this becomes a cycle and a source of the perpetually racist and stifling American economic system. So I'd like to thank all these people. Dr. Cantrell, the Art Program, the NCSM Humanities Department, the admissions team, and some of my former teachers that inspired this project.
Thank you, Aiden. We now will open it up